So what is a remortgage? You can remortgage in two instances. The first instance, you generally remortgage when your mortgage deal comes to an end. So for example, if you have a 2-year deal, maybe 6 months in advance, you can start approaching a mortgage broker and tell them to get you a better deal. And now that's known as a remortgage. And the second instance where you do a remortgage is, let's say you need some additional money and you want to take some money out of your mortgage. You can still break your mortgage and move to a different lender. Even that's known as a remortgage. So why should you remortgage? You should remortgage if your mortgage deal is coming to an end. Usually we say, do this 6 months before your deal comes to an end. A lot of people like to sit down and relax and wait till the last minute. But if that happens, you may move to a standard variable rate. So in that instance, you need to remortgage. And the second instance is, if you are getting a better rate out there and your early repayment charges with the banks are low, and if you're going to save money, that might be an instance where you could consider remortgage. So when should you remortgage? You need to remortgage on the very first working day after your existing mortgage deal ends. So that's the best time. But planning is required. So you need to plan in advance. We usually say plan in advance 6 months ahead, because you can start approaching lenders 6 months in advance. So that is the best time to do a remortgage. So can you remortgage early? Generally, we don't recommend if it does not give you financial benefit. We don't tell people to remortgage early. So that's why we say when your mortgage deal finishes or it comes to an end, do the remortgage, but you need to plan this in advance. But if you're getting financial benefits, say for example, if your interest rate that you're currently paying is way too high and you have better rates, and even if you pay that penalty, it still benefits you, then it's worth looking at it. So how often can you remortgage? And is there a limit? As far as I know, there's no limits as such as to when you can remortgage. But it might not be the cost-effective thing for you to do, because when you remortgage, there might be ERCs or early repayment charge that you have to pay to your existing lender. So that will stop people from doing that. Generally, it's recommended to remortgage when your deal finishes, unless maybe you're on a variable rate and it will benefit you if you move to a better fixed rate out there. So in those instances, it could work. Always rely on an advisor if you're not sure, because you might end up spending a lot of money on these extra charges while you do unnecessary remortgages. Should I remortgage if the interest rate has gone up or down? So if the interest rate has gone up, very likely if you're going to be paying a higher interest rate, it may not be worthwhile financially for you to remortgage. But if the interest rate has come down and you're on a higher interest rate, you may benefit from this. But again, we need to do a calculation to see how much you will benefit financially as opposed to the savings that you're going to make while you remortgage. So you need to do that calculation. So that costs can involve things like early repayment charges, like solicitor fees and like surveying fees. There could be so many other costs. So somebody's got to sit down and do that calculation. And generally, that is your mortgage advisor. So how long does it take to remortgage? Generally, we tell people, give it a good 3 months at least, because there could be a lot of things that could go wrong in between. Generally, it should take 4 to 6 weeks for you to remortgage if you're moving from one bank to the other. But a lot of things could go wrong because there are solicitors involved, there are surveys involved, and there are so many things that's beyond your control. So if bank cannot verify your identity or they're struggling to verify your income, that could delay your process as well. So that's why I'm saying, even though it's 4 to 6 weeks, give it at least 3 months. And we from WIS, we always recommend 6 months. So what is the remortgage process? So the remortgage process is pretty simple. Speak to an advisor or look for rates out there and see whether that suits you and it suits your circumstances. That's where the advisor becomes very, very important. They can see and they can tell you whether that suits your circumstances. So once you're happy with that, and then you have a rate that you want to apply for, then you can apply with that particular lender. But you need to make sure you meet that lender's lending criteria. A lot of people say, oh, I saw a rate out there because I get this all the time, but you may not qualify for that rate. For example, you might be self-employed and who's just started self-employment. So you may not qualify for that rate. So therefore, your circumstances can vary. Therefore, it's always best to get advice on this before you just jump the gun. So do you need a solicitor to remortgage? The answer is yes. If you're moving lenders, the lenders will want a solicitor involved because there is a certain process that they need to follow. But if you're sticking to the same lender and doing what we call a product transfer, you're unlikely to need a solicitor. So solicitor is needed if you're moving lenders. But be careful, because what happens is sometimes there are delays in the solicitor, and if the solicitor you have chosen is bad, you may end up paying early repayment charges, which is going to be costly. I've had instances where people have been adamant on cheaper solicitors and end up having to pay a lot of money in early repayment charge. So what looked cheap on the face actually ended up being much more expensive. So be careful. So what does a solicitor do in a remortgage? So with a remortgage, you're moving from one lender to the other. So when you're moving from one lender to the other, you need to make sure that the mortgage, which is a charge against the property, moves from one lender to the other. So they will do that process, and also the solicitor has to make sure that they abide by the anti-money laundering regulations, which means they'll do things like identity checks. They will also verify things like your bank statements, and they will do a process that covers that area. And also they will make sure that the land registry has the latest information after the remortgage. So there is a bit of a process they need to follow. They may do some local searches and things like that, but that will be quite minimum that they will do. But there is still a process that the solicitor needs to follow. So do you need a house valuation when you remortgage? Common question. The answer is yes. The lender will want to make sure that the house that they are remortgaging under their name actually is the value that you're telling it to be. So therefore, they will do a remortgage. Quite often, they do something called a drive-by, where they drive by your property to see the valuation is correct. Sometimes they do something called an AVM, which means they value the property remotely, or they might even turn up at your property. So there are three ways that they do valuations. But the lender will certainly want to make sure that the property that they are remortgaging is the said value. So therefore, they will do a valuation. So what information do you need for remortgaging? So remortgaging, if you take the word RE out, it's like a mortgage. So it's the same process that you need to follow. So when you remortgage, the banks will verify your income, they will verify your expenses, they will verify your identity, and they will look at the property. So they will do the same thing that they do like you're purchasing a property, and then they will do a valuation as well. So they will do the same thing. So the process in terms of documentation is going to be very similar. So how can you improve your credit score before a remortgage? Pretty simple. Just make sure that you do not have any missed payments. That's the first most important thing. Then just make sure you have set up all your payments on direct debits and make sure that those are paid on time. And also make sure that you have your credit cards under control. You know, some people have credit cards and they have balances, but they don't settle it in full. That is okay, but so long as you have it under control. What we generally say is if you're using about 30-40% of your credit card, it's fine, but as much as possible, settle that in full. So the banks are actually going to look at whether you have control over your finances and whether you can make that mortgage commitment. So that's what you need to do. So if that's reflected in your credit score, you should be fine. So can you raise money for home improvement through a remortgage? The short answer is yes, you can do. Obviously, bank will verify your income and various other things, and they'll want to know whether you're actually borrowing this money for the purpose of home improvement. So long as you can prove that, you can do that. But what I normally tell my clients is be careful. I've seen instances where people borrow money to do home improvement, but they end up doing something else. So be careful with that. You're supposed to only use that money for that purpose. And also remember, you're going to add additional debt into your mortgage. So you don't want to be paying this debt and interest on top of that debt throughout your lives. So be careful before you do that. But yes, you can borrow extra money to do home improvement. So can you borrow extra money to settle debt? The short answer is yes. In the mortgage world, we call it debt consolidation. So if you're doing debt consolidation, it's always a good idea to get advice because it adds up to your debt. So sometimes it's better if you have, say, for example, credit cards where you're paying 25%, but whereas your mortgage interest is like, say, 4%, for you to do a debt consolidation, but you need to get advice before you do that. Because in paper, it looks okay, but you need to do certain calculations. And also, we need to make sure that the debt that you're taking, you're going to be paying this debt over a longer period of time. So you might pay 5% now, but 5% over 30 years could be something else. So just be mindful of that. Can you get additional money for energy efficient home improvements when you remortgage? The short answer is yes. The lenders out there have different schemes that they have introduced, and they want people to be very energy efficient along with the government plans. So therefore, there are a lot of schemes out there. There are even schemes where you have interest-free options that banks offer to move you from one energy efficient band to the next one. So for this information, always speak to your advisors because they might be able to guide you on this one.